In this lesson, we'll continue our discussion of the reproductive system by taking a look at the female reproductive system. So let's begin by taking a look at the external anatomy of the female reproductive system. When we look at the external genitalia from the outside, that area is known as the vulva or the pudendum. So that would be like this. So this whole area here kind of shows us the vulva or the pudendum. Within the vulva, there's an area known as the vestibule. So let me show you that first, and then we'll look at the notes. If we take a look here, this fold of skin right here, this is the labia minora. This is actually thin. There's no adipose tissue in here. You notice there's no pubic hair on there. This is the labia minora on this side. The area in between the two labia minora is the vestibule. Within the vestibule, we have the urethra, right? So this is for urine, and then the vaginal canal over here. Okay, so the vestibule is a central space bounded by the labia minora. And again, the labia minora are smooth, no pubic hair. Within the vestibule is going to be the urethra, and that is just in front of or anterior to the vaginal canal. Just like we saw in the male reproductive system, the male had erectile tissue. Females have the same type of erectile tissue, but it's located on either side of the vestibule. And these are known as the vestibular bulbs. So on the left side here, we can see they cut away so we can look in. All of this purple right here, this represents the vestibular bulbs. Now it would be on this side also, which is not seeing it. So that's erectile tissue. Here's another picture just kind of showing um, labia minora on the left, labia minora on the right, urethra, vaginal canal, and then again the erectile tissue just to the side here, and then we see it again over here. Okay, so those are known as the vestibular bulbs. So the female also has an exposed area within the vulva known as the clitoris, right? This is similar to the male penis. This is homologous, a homologous structure to the male penis. We're only seeing a portion of the clitoris that's exposed. It also, just like in the male, the penis extended into the pelvic cavity. It does the same thing in the female. So let's see which way to go right here. This would be the clitoris. This is the exposed portion. This is actually known as the glans of the clitoris. Now, again, if you studied or remember the male reproductive system, the tip of the penis was known as the glans, right? Same thing here. The tip of the clitoris is known as the glans clitoris. While I'm here, before I go back to the notes, just like in the male, remember the male had a covering over the glans penis known as the prepuce? Females have the same thing. So this covering right here is known as the prepuce, just like it is in the male. And so it's similar structures. Now, there's a couple other glands associated with the female reproductive system. Um, there's these glands called the lesser vestibular glands. A lot of times in medicine and gynecology, they'll call them the Skene's glands, and then also the paraurethral gland. These glands are equivalent to the male prostate gland. And just like the male prostate gland opened up into the urethra, these glands also open up into the urethra. Let's take a look. So here is the bladder, right, the urinary bladder, urethra. See these four little blue glands? One, two, three, four. They are the paraurethral glands, right? Para means next to, urethra. So they're next to the urethra, and they'll secrete their secretions right into the urethra, then come out this way to the vestibule area. The other gland, before I go back to the notes, right here is the greater vestibular gland. If you remember from the male reproductive system, the Cowper's gland or the bulbourethral gland, that was the one that produced like an alkaline secretion into the male urethra. Remember we said it neutralized the pH of the urethra. Remember that urine has a pH of about 6, and that sperm, wouldn't do well in that type of environment. So the that secretion would help to neutralize tube, the urethra, and then it would go onto the glans penis and lubricate the glans penis. This is the equivalent gland in a female right here. This is called the greater vestibular gland. And by the way, a lot of times in medicine and gynecology, they'll call them Bartholin's glands. And you see, it kind of looks like the Cowper's gland or the bulbourethral gland, and it's going to secrete, it's kind of a thicker mucus alkaline secretion right here into the vaginal canal. Again, this is an acidic environment here, and it will help to lubricate for sexual intercourse. Right, so they're both the same function, right? The greater vestibular gland or the Bartholin's gland, same function as in the male Cowper's gland or bulbourethral gland. Right, so the greater vestibular glands or the Bartholin glands, they're equivalent to the male bulbourethral gland, and then they're going to secrete into the vestibule right near the vaginal entrance, again, to neutralize that acidic environment of the vaginal canal, as well as provide lubrication. The last kind of part of the external genitalia, above the pubic bone, we have a little bit more adipose tissue. Whoop, right here. Right here, kind of a little bit more adipose tissue. This is known as the mons pubis. And then extending down from there are two larger folds. This does contain adipose tissue, and you can see pubic hair right here, adipose tissue and pubic hair. These are the labia majora. The labia majora, we have it labeled down over here. And these folds of the skin actually will come together and protect this entire region here. It just kind of closes up and protects this entire region. Right, so this raised area right here, mons pubis, labia majora, labia majora over here. Okay, and that is our external anatomy of the female reproductive system. Let's move on more internally now. Let's take a look at the ovaries, right? Ovaries are small, kind of almond-shaped organs near the lateral walls of the pelvic cavity. If we were to cut into an ovary, we would see like two distinct areas. The outer area is known as the cortex, and this is where we see the follicles, and they're in various stages of development, and the follicles will contain the egg or the oocyte. The middle area is known as the medulla. This contains more like connective tissue and blood vessels. So here's a picture of the ovary, cut in a frontal plane. All of this outer area here is the cortex, right? And you can see there's different levels of follicular development, right? So like this is a follicle, and then here's the oocyte or the egg, and you can see they're just in different stages of development. So that's all on the outside or the cortex. In the middle is the medulla, and you can see there's blood vessels in there, and then there's some connective tissue, that type of thing inside here. Let's take a look at some of these follicles. So early in fetal life, right? The baby girl isn't even born yet. In fetal life, we have these follicles being developed known as primordial follicles, right? As I said, they're produced in fetal life. Each follicle contains what we call a primary oocyte. Oocyte is really the real correct term for an egg, right? Typically, we don't typically say egg. We say oocyte, and the primary follicle is going to be surrounded by a single layer of follicular cells, right? These are cells that surround the follicle. Primordial follicles then become primary follicles. The primary oocyte is now surrounded by layers of what we call granulosa cells, and these are important because they begin producing hormones, right? Different hormones that are necessary for the reproductive cycle. Primary follicles become secondary follicles, and we start to see in the secondary follicles a bit of fluid starting to develop, and the fluid then merges into like a little lake, so to speak, and they form this area known as the antrum. I'll show you real quick here. Um, if you take a look over here, it's like a you see it better on here, but see this little area right here? This is actually an antrum that contains fluids, like a little lake. This whole thing is the follicle, right, like that. And then here's the oocyte right there, right, and then there's the antrum. So we start to see that antrum developing during the secondary follicles. Secondary follicles then mature into tertiary follicles. A term that I want you to know, as I still hear it around, is known as a Graafian follicle. So you can say either a tertiary or a Graafian follicle. Now we get around uh, the Graafian follicle, we get a large antrum, right? That fluid-filled area is a larger antrum. And then we'll see the antrum, and on the other side is the oocyte. And the oocyte is surrounded by cells known as the corona radiata. So just to kind of show you here, this is kind of giving you an idea. So this is those primordial follicles here. And then we have the primary follicles here. You can see some of the fecal cells around there. Then the secondary follicle, we start to see a little bit of fluid in here. Right? And then the tertiary follicle, a nice big antrum over here. Right? Here's uh, the 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 oocyte, right? Some of the cells around there. After ovulation, right, where the oocyte is expelled from the follicle, that follicle is going to remain, is going to be really important to, if there's pregnancy, to the survival of the pregnancy until the placenta is formed. So when the egg or the oocyte is ejected during ovulation, the remaining follicle is called the corpus luteum. This is the yellow body, right? Corpus means body, and luteum is yellow. So this is an important part of the early pregnancy. It secretes like massive amounts of estrogen and progesterone, again, which keeps the pregnancy viable until the placenta is formed. If there was no fertilization, there was no pregnancy, the corpus luteum would kind of hang out there for maybe about 2 weeks, and then it's going to start to stop functioning and it will degenerate and turn into the white body, the corpus albicans, and that corpus luteum just kind of turns into scar tissue and stops producing the hormones. Right, here's the corpus luteum over here. So this picture here that's showing you the ovulation, right? The oocyte is being ejected from the follicle, and then this is the corpus luteum that remains. So over here is a pretty good picture. You can see the primary follicle, secondary follicle, the tertiary follicle. Look at that nice big antrum, right? Here's the oocyte over here. Then ovulation, the oocyte is released, and then what's left over, this is the corpus luteum. And like I said, this will be stay viable for about 2 weeks, producing massive amounts of estrogen and progesterone, really keeping that pregnancy, the uterus, nice and thick for the implantation, and the embryo to develop until the placenta develops. And this would maintain during pregnancy. However, if there was no fertilization, no pregnancy, right, this will last for a couple of weeks, and then it turns into the corpus albicans, and that stops producing the hormones, and that actually causes then the onset of menses during the menstrual cycle. So our ovaries need to be held in place, right? They just can't be, moving around. We would never have, fertilization if that was the case. So there are some important ligaments related to the ovaries as well as the uterus. The first one is known as the ovarian ligament, and this is basically connecting the ovary to the uterus. So this is a posterior view of the uterus, right? And you can see over here, this is a right and left ovary. The ligament that I'm talking about is right here on this side and right there over here. This is the ovarian ligament. So this is basically holding the ovary to the uterus, right? So the ovary doesn't, fall away. Now, before I go back to the notes, we need to keep the ovary suspended. We can't have it fall down over here alongside of the uterus, right? If these two fell down alongside the uterus, right, we would have a problem. So there's a ligament, we see it right here going up. This is going to hold the ovaries up. You can see a little bit of it over here. This is going to hold the ovaries up. These are known as the suspensory ligaments. Right, so these are basically connecting the ovary to the posterior abdominal wall, so they stay suspended. There's another ligament known as the broad ligament. This is a large, kind of a flat membrane. You'll see why they call it broad ligament in a moment, that extends from the lateral aspect of the uterus. And it's not just supporting the ovaries, it's also supporting the fallopian tubes as well as the uterus. So it's kind of doing more than just the ovaries. Here it is. So extending here from the side of the uterus, look at this ligament, big, broad ligament going all the way to the side. And you can see it's kind of supporting the ovary, supporting the fallopian tube as well as the uterus. This is an interesting picture. This is a picture where we're actually looking down into the female pelvis. It's kind of like a superior view, looking down into the female pelvis. You can see here it's anterior. Here's the bladder, urinary bladder. Right behind it is the uterus. And then right behind that is the rectum, right? This would actually be the rectum over here. So some of the ligaments that we're talking about. Here's the ovary. This would be the ovarian ligament right here, right there. This is the suspensory ligament here on this side and this side. So they're holding the ovaries up. And then here's the broad ligament right over here and on this side. So it's an interesting view. I didn't do all of the ligaments. I didn't do the cardinal ligaments and the uterosacral ligaments. There's others. I kind of hit the main. I hit the main ligaments. Let me just make sure we got everything here. So ovarian ligament, suspensory ligament, and the broad ligaments. Those are the three I'd like you to know for now. From the ovaries, the oocyte would enter the uterine tube, right, which are known commonly as the fallopian tubes, and you may even hear the term oviduct, right? They're all two the terms that are used. And the job of the uterine tube is to transport the oocyte from the ovary to the uterus. Even if, I didn't put it here, but even if there was like products of conception, those early cells of of a new baby, that type of thing, they would have to be transported along the fallopian tube to the uterus. We divide the fallopian tube into three parts. So the first part is known as the infundibulum, right? This is infundibulum means funnel shaped, kind of has a funnel type of a shape. So if you take a look here, this here is kind of funnel shaped. This is the infundibulum. And then extending from the infundibulum are these little finger-like projections here. These are known as fimbriae, right? So the fimbriae extend from the infundibulum. While I'm here, I'll finish this. Then the fallopian tube kind of curves this way. This is known as the ampulla, right? This is the usual site of fertilization. So if sperm are here, fertilization will take place this way. And then the remaining tube going to the uterus is the isthmus. Okay, so again, the infundibulum is the expanded funnel portion. It has the fimbriae, that extend kind of into the pelvic cavity, and these fimbriae help to move the oocyte into the fallopian tube. They almost think of like little fingers, just kind of enticing the oocyte to come into the infundibulum. Right, the ampulla, like I said, is the middle segment. If you want to mark down, this is the usual site of fertilization. And then the isthmus is going to be the rest of the fallopian tube extending into the uterus. I just want to show you over here. There's just one other picture here. Here it's cut. We can see the fimbriae nicely, right? Nicely here. Fimbriae, infundibulum. Again, the ampulla here, and then the isthmus over here. So those were the fallopian tubes. And again, as I said, they led to the uterus. So let's take a look at the uterus now. So the uterus provides for the developing embryo and the fetus. So just so you know, there's a difference between embryo and fetus. The first 8 weeks of our life, we're an embryo. Right? And then from there, from 9 weeks all the way to delivery, we're considered a fetus. So it's kind of a at 8 weeks we make the cutoffs. Let's take a look at the anatomy of the uterus. It has three parts. So if we take it, this is a posterior view of the uterus. This main portion here, all of this is the body. And this actually has a cavity in it known as the uterine cavity. Excuse me. Above the body is going to be this kind of bubbled area up over here. This is known as the fundus. And then the bottom part that extends a little bit, like maybe a half an inch or so into the vaginal canal. This little portion here is the cervix. Okay, so body that contains the uterine cavity. This little piece that bubbles up right here is the fundus. And then the piece down here is the cervix. Okay, body, fundus, and the cervix. Now, a couple parts of the cervix I'd like you to know. This little opening right here is going to be the external os, right? Os means opening. Then there's a little canal right here within the cervix. This is going to be the cervical canal. And then there's another opening here that's going to lead into the uterine cavity. That's the internal os. Okay? External os, cervical canal, internal os. And again, you can see the cervix projecting a little bit down into the vaginal canal over here. All right, so the distal end of the cervix projects about 1.25 centimeters into the vagina. Like I said, it's maybe a half an inch or so. And again, we have the external os, that's the external orifice of the uterus. And then the cervical canal, that's that little constricted passageway that's going to lead to the uterine cavity. And then the opening into the uterine cavity is known as the internal os. Now, so those are the regions of the uterus. The uterus is also made up of three linings. So it has three regions and it also has three linings. Again, on an exam, you want to make sure you read the question carefully. If I were to ask for, identify the region of the uterus, I'm looking for, fundus, body, cervix. If I'm asking for the lining, then I'm asking for these three guys here. The innermost lining is the endometrium. The middle lining is the myometrium, and then the outer lining is going to be the perimetrium. So the endometrium is the inner layer, as I said. This is going to slough off, or portions of it, it's going to slough off during the menstrual cycle, right, during menstruation. The middle layer is the myometrium. This is a much thicker layer containing smooth muscle. That's responsible for those contractions of labor. And then the perimetrium is the outer layer, and that's just the visceral peritoneum. So we can see them here. So again, this kind of lighter area right here, this would be the endometrium. And look at this, the thicker area right here is the myometrium. This is all smooth muscle. And then the outer layer right here is the perimetrium. And we can see a lot of blood vessels entering the uterus. So here's a picture that's showing us the kind of a cross section. So here would be the uterine cavity. And we would have then all of this to say about here is the myometrium. I'm sorry, is the endometrium. Excuse me. This is the endometrium. Then this is the myometrium below it. But if you notice, the endometrium is divided into two parts. From this little line here up, this is what we call the functional layer or functional zone. When I went to school, we learned it as the stratum functionalis. And then here's the basilar zone, or the stratum basalis. So here's the difference. They both are part of the endometrium, except this top part here, the functional zone, this is the part that sloughs off each month during menstruation if there is no pregnancy. The basilar area or zone always stays the same. The basilar zone is going to give rise to a new functional zone after menstruation takes place. So this is kind of a constant. This doesn't change, where this does get sloughed off month to month. Okay, so let's take a look real quick at the uterine cycle, right? This is what's happening in the uterus during the female reproductive cycle. The first 5 days, let's say we have a 28-day month, right? Perfect, like 28-day month. The first 5 days of the uterine cycle is known as the menstrual phase. This is where we have a breakdown of the that functional layer of the endometrium, right? There's a breakdown of uterine glands and blood vessels in the functional zone of the endometrium, and that results in a menstrual flow, right? Or commonly known as menses, right? Menstruation or menses. If we were to look under the microscope, you could see now all of these glands are kind of disintegrating. This is all kind of like falling apart in here. This is going to be that whole functional area being broken down. So that lasts about 5 days. From day 6 to 14, this is where that functional zone is going to be rebuilt, right? So roughly days 6 to 14 on a perfect 28-day cycle would be right in there. The basal zone of the endometrium is going to give rise to a new functional zone, right? We'll see new uterine glands begin to form. Some of the glands are simple and some are they're just simple. They don't branch. I'm not too concerned about that. And we start to see that the endometrium starts to thicken. Right, so these little red circles here, these are the new uterine glands that are forming, and again, you can see the nice functional zone being built up again. If I go back to the menstrual, right, you see this is all kind of just looking like it's all falling apart. Things are shedding off over here compared to how it's all like nice and organized again here. Okay, so this is known as the proliferative phase, right, where we're kind of building back up the endometrium. At day 14, there would be ovulation, right? So that we kind of skipped over day 14, if you noticed. And then from day 15 to day 28, right, the second half of the month, we're going to get what we call the secretory phase. At this point, the uterine glands become more branched and they're more well developed, and the uterine lining is nice and thick. Uh, for implantation. So if there was a pregnancy and we did have, the cells of conception come down, right, they would have a place to implant. So you can see now we have nice, uterine glands over here, nice thick functional zone of the uterus for implantation for those cells of the baby, of the embryo. Okay. The last organ of the female reproductive system is the vagina. This is an elastic muscular tube. It extends between the cervix and to the vestibule. Remember, the vestibule was that area between the two labia minora, and it's roughly 3 to 3.5 inches in length. It's highly distensible. When you think about, when the baby comes down, it's got pretty broad shoulders, a head, right? That cervix has to be able to 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 stretch a little bit to provide for birth. The cervix, as we said before, projects into the vaginal canal just a little bit, maybe a half an inch or so. Now, the area around where the cervix projects into the vaginal canal is known as the fornix. So this little recess right here kind of goes all the way around the cervix. This is known as the fornix, and we can see it over here also. All of this would be the fornix. What's interesting right here, this posterior fornix right there, this is the site of ejaculation. So this is where sperm is deposited right here. Right, and then the sperm will move into the external os, into the cervical canal, internal os, and then into the cervical cavity. I take it back, uterine cavity, and then into the fallopian tubes all the way up here. So they have quite a journey to make, right? And here's the ampulla where fertilization would take place. Right, so they're kind of going from here all the way through like this, all the way up this way here to there. So I just want to show you that recess right there is known as the fornix. And the vagina, where we find it, right, it's going to lie parallel to the rectum, right? So the rectum is going to be posterior, and then the urethra would be in the front. So we go back to this picture here. Here's the vaginal canal right here. So notice the rectum is posterior, and the urethra is anterior right here. Okay, the last part of the female reproductive system we just want to mention are the mammary glands. So these are two glands that lay over the pec major, the pectoralis major muscle. There are some ligaments that help support the weight of the breast. They're known as the suspensory ligaments. So if you take a look, here's like the pec major muscle here. So these ligaments just kind of come up right into the breast tissue, and they're helping to suspend the breast, so to hold the weight of the breast up a little bit. Within the breast, we have these lobes of glandular tissue. So each breast has about 15 to 20 lobes. And then within the lobes, there are these lobules. These are clusters of glandular cells within the lobe, and they're the ones that are going to make, obviously, the breast milk. Now, there's a duct that's going to deliver the breast milk to the nipple. This is known as the lactiferous duct, right? So again, these little clusters here would be the lobules. and then milk is going to be made, and it's going to come into the lactiferous duct right here. There'll be a little bit of a swelling. This is known as the lactiferous sinus, and then that little tube is going to lead right to the nipple. So you can see all of these lactiferous ducts are leading right to the nipple right over here. Like I said, that lactiferous sinus is the expanded area of the lactiferous duct, which is going to hold the breast milk prior to breastfeeding. Then we have the areola. That would be the area around the nipple here, right? The nipple and the areola, and and then the nipple, like I said, projects from the areola, and that's for the baby to suckle, and the baby's able to get their breast milk. Okay, you can also see, I didn't put it in the notes, but you can see there's also adipose tissue inside of the breast, kind of just supporting all of the glands. And that concludes our lesson on the female reproductive system.